12 people sat in a room in Washington this week. Their decision just made your future mortgage more expensive. You didn't apply for a loan. You didn't check your credit score. But the number waiting for you the next time you borrow money already moved. Most people believe the Federal Reserve controls interest rates with one simple dial. Turn it up and borrowing gets expensive. Turn it down and borrowing gets cheap. That explanation is wrong. On July 29th, the Fed left its main rate exactly where it was. And the cost of long-term borrowing went up anyway. How does that happen? Start with what actually took place in that room. The Federal Open Market Committee voted 9-3 to hold rates steady at 3.50 to 3.75%. That's the sixth meeting in a row without a change. 3 members wanted to raise rates instead. Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh, only 2 meetings into the job, called it a family fight. He said it like a compliment. Behind that phrase is something most viewers never see, a room full of powerful economists who couldn't agree on whether inflation is actually under control. But the vote wasn't the interesting part. The reaction was. Normally, when a central bank refuses to raise rates, borrowing gets cheaper across the board. Investors relax. Bond yields fall. That's the textbook response. This time, the opposite happened. The yield on the 10-year Treasury bond climbed to 4.657%. The 30-year bond, the one that quietly sets the price of your future mortgage, jumped past 5.19%. Meanwhile, stocks slid. The Dow dropped more than 840 points in a single afternoon. Something wasn't behaving the way it was supposed to. Here's the part almost nobody explains clearly enough. There are 2 separate interest rates in the American economy, and they don't move together. One is the short-term rate the Fed sets directly, the number you hear about in headlines. The other is the long-term rate, set not by the Fed, but by millions of investors trading bonds every day. That second rate is a bet. A bet on where inflation is heading over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And this week, that bet turned against Kevin Warsh. Why would investors bet against the Fed's own chairman? Before Warsh took the job in May, he spent years publicly attacking his predecessor, Jerome Powell, for one specific flaw, a lack of credibility. Warsh argued that when a central bank says one thing and markets believe another, the whole system gets more expensive to run. It's a sharp argument. It's also, this week, one that boomeranged back at him. Inflation has stayed above the Fed's 2% target for over 5 years running, by Warsh's own account. Investors watched him choose not to raise rates despite that. And their conclusion wasn't relief. It was doubt. Doubt has a price tag. When investors doubt a central bank will fight inflation hard enough, they demand a higher return for lending money over long periods. That demand pushes long-term yields up, even while short-term rates sit frozen. It's the bond market's version of a raised eyebrow. Nobody panics. Nobody sells everything. Money just quietly gets more expensive to borrow for years at a time, 1 basis point at a time, without a single Fed announcement. This is the part that reframes everything. You've probably pictured the Fed's decision as the event. It isn't. The event is the argument happening after the decision, between the Fed and every investor holding a 10-year bond, over who actually believes inflation will come down. That argument is invisible. But it sets your car loan rate, your student loan rate, whether your business can afford to expand next year. And this week, the Fed lost that argument, at least for a day. There's a strange twist inside this too. Even with hawkish signals and a market pricing in a 90% chance rates stay higher through year-end, the S&P 500 had climbed 10% in 2026 as of late July. Stocks kept rising through months of this same tension. Investors were betting rates would stay firm and buying anyway, confident that corporate earnings could outrun the higher cost of money. This week's sell-off wasn't a crash. It was the first real crack in that confidence, the first day the bet looked shakier than it had all year. So what does any of this mean for you, sitting outside that room in Washington? It means the number on your next loan isn't decided the moment the Fed makes an announcement. It's decided in the days after, while traders quietly argue about whether they believe what they just heard. Every time a headline says the Fed held rates steady, check what happened to the 10-year yield before you assume nothing changed. Sometimes the quiet reaction says more than the loud decision. Sometimes the room agrees on nothing, and the market decides for them anyway. If stories like this help you actually understand where your money goes, stay a little longer. There's another one waiting right after this, and it might change how you read the next headline. 12 people met in a room in Washington this week. They didn't raise your mortgage rate. The argument that followed them out the door did.